A nuclear apocalypse, the ever-present possibility of an end to life as we know it. Weapons so deadly they dare not be used. But what if a country could effectively defend against such weapons? It would change everything. And that is exactly what the United States is trying to do with its Golden Dome initiative, a theoretical integrated web of space-based sensors, interception systems, and command and control nodes, which if built to its fullest extent could easily become the most expensive endeavor humanity has ever pursued. It seems that we live in an increasingly dangerous world, with Russia threatening nuclear attack, China expanding its nuclear arsenal, and North Korea just one man's bad mood away from starting a nuclear war. Yet for decades these countries have avoided attacking each other, knowing that to do so would be to cause mutually assured destruction. Yet that might all change soon with the Golden Dome. Welcome to Buried Origins. Today we're going to be exploring what the Golden Dome is and why it's such a big deal. So let's get into it. Well, actually, before we get into the lasers, we need to start with the idea of deterrence, which is basically, don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you. But in a global stage with nuclear powers, it's, don't launch a nuclear attack against me, I won't launch a nuclear attack against you. But that entire idea of deterrence only works if both sides believe the threat is credible, and neither side believes that they can survive a nuclear attack, such as by destroying their enemy's nuclear arsenal first, or being able to defend against it. As a real-world example, if the US thought it could attack Russia and destroy its nuclear arsenal before it was launched, then it wouldn't be afraid of a Russian nuclear response, and suddenly the US is no longer deterred from attacking. It might actually be encouraged to attack while it had the chance. The same could be said if the US wasn't afraid of a Russian nuclear attack because they had an effective way to defend against it. Herein enters missile defense, a technology that countries have poured massive amounts of funding into, as missiles are by far the most effective way to deliver a nuclear warhead to their target. Now, missile defense isn't new. Ever since nuclear warheads could be miniaturized and fit onto missiles, countries have been looking for ways to shoot those missiles down to remove their adversaries' means of deterrence. This was especially true during the Cold War, when both the US and Soviet Union were looking for ways to remove their adversaries' means of deterrence. The US sought a way to defend against the Soviet Union's nuclear arsenal, and President Reagan thought he found the answer in 1983 with the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. It was a plan to build a shield over the US using space-based lasers, satellites, and ground interceptors to destroy incoming nuclear missiles. Complementing this was the brilliant Pebbles proposal, which was to have thousands of small autonomous satellites floating in low Earth orbit, ready to detect and intercept enemy missiles within seconds of launch. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's essentially what the Golden Dome is supposed to be. But back in the 80s, the technology wasn't developed enough, and the end of the Cold War a few years later reduced the ever-present fear of a nuclear attack, so the plan was abandoned. Fun sidebar, in 1986, Reagan met with the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, where Gorbachev actually proposed that both countries get rid of their nuclear weapons entirely. But Reagan was so obsessed with the idea of being able to defend against nukes with Star Wars that he rejected the proposal. People forget how close the two powers came to giving up nuclear weapons entirely. Okay, so ballistic missile defense has evolved significantly since the end of the Cold War, and the US has invested tremendous amounts of funding into it with the emergence of new threats like North Korea, China, Iran, and most recently, once again, Russia. This has led to massive technological breakthroughs in several key technologies, like the sensor systems which detect and track the missiles, the interceptors which go to destroy them, and the command and control system which coordinates the entire thing. At the same time, a revolution in the civilian space sector has overcome one of the main hurdles Star Wars faced, the ability to put mass satellite constellations in low Earth orbit, with Elon Musk's Starlink network being the world's biggest with 7,000 satellites in orbit right now. On top of this, the new revolution in AI holds great promise for making these satellites coordinate fast enough to intercept nuclear missiles, which can take as little as 5 minutes to hit the US if launched from a submarine right off the coast. So suddenly, the US is in a new threatened environment, and technology has progressed far enough to make Star Wars feasible, and President Trump is pushing ahead to make it a reality, only this time he's calling it Golden Dome. So what exactly is it? At the heart of the system is a space-based sensor network, a constellation of satellites equipped with thermal imaging, radar, and AI-enhanced targeting. These would be able to spot a missile launch anywhere in the world within seconds. Although the US already has satellites to detect launches and a series of interception capabilities on the ground, the thing that makes Golden Dome different from earlier systems is its global integration. It's a web of sensors, data processing nodes, command and control systems, and interception platforms, working together in real time. And it's not simply linking a bunch of existing systems together. It would involve an entirely new layer of low Earth orbit satellites to make it possible to detect remote launches and accurately track missiles in their flight path for optimal interception. Once those missiles are detected and the trajectory is calculated, the Golden Dome would kick into action using a combination of land and sea-based interceptors and possibly orbital weapons platforms containing interceptors or direct energy weapons. Now, direct energy weapons like lasers and high-powered microwaves, which are powerful enough to destroy missiles, are still very much in their developmental phase. The US has some which they've been experimenting with on ships, but the power requirements for such systems are usually so large that it is infeasible to mount them on smaller platforms like planes, which the US has tried several times but abandoned. The same limitation would exist for getting those systems into space. However, there have been major advancements in these systems over the past few years, and the Golden Dome is a system which would be built over the course of decades. So in its later development, we can likely expect to see direct energy weapons form a core part, but in its early stages, the attack satellites in the constellation would likely host missile interceptors and perform their interception similar to what happens in the atmosphere, but in this case it would be much faster as the intercontinental ballistic missiles, which carry nuclear warheads, fly through space for a long part of their journey, and the attack satellites would be in convenient locations for taking them out. And then there's the software. AI would play a major role in the Golden Dome, as its command system would need to sift through massive amounts of radar and satellite data, predict missile trajectories, and assign interception assets instantaneously, all without waiting for human input. That's absolutely critical when dealing with hundreds of missiles flying on different trajectories, all moving up to 15,000 miles per hour, or 4 miles a second. So as I mentioned earlier, this system would be a huge deal. If it was actually built and proven to be effective, it would entirely change the global balance of power and the rules of deterrence which underwrite how countries like the US, China, and Russia deal with each other. The US could be significantly more aggressive with other countries, as those countries would have lost their most powerful form of deterrence. It would change every political calculation that US administrations made, as they would have an underlying assumption that regardless of what they did, their country could not be destroyed. In today's world, the US could be infinitely more aggressive towards Russia over Ukraine, seizing Russian cargo ships and sending US troops into the country with no serious repercussions. The US could establish massive military bases in Taiwan and dare China to attack its forces there. It would only have to worry about North Korea in relation to the damage it could do to US allies. So it could essentially walk over everyone, knowing that the worst repercussions it would face would be reputational, economic, and conventional. Now this all seems drastic, and it is, but because the Golden Dome is a system which will take decades to construct, it also gives adversaries ample time to develop counters to it, such as missiles which are hardened against direct energy weapons and anti-satellite technology. And herein we find the added layer of danger with such a system. Not only does it make conflict between countries such as the US and China more realistic, it also encourages the targeting of each country's assets in space. China has been advancing its anti-satellite capabilities to counter the US for years. If the two powers were to start blowing each other's satellites up, it could trigger what is known as the Kessler Syndrome, which is a theorized chain reaction of collisions between space debris and objects, which would eventually render several orbits unusable. Think of it as the same as a nuclear apocalypse, but in space. Blowing up a few satellites creates tens of thousands of pieces of debris that smash other satellites to bits, and on until no country can put satellites into those orbits anymore. Now, Golden Dome might seem like science fiction and a long way off, but SpaceX started launching Starlink satellites back in 2019 and already has 7,000 in orbit. It's also currently the lead bidder on building the Sensor Array constellation, which forms a core part of the Golden Dome. So it's not outlandish to think that we might see the first Golden Dome satellites enter orbit during President Trump's administration. Now, whether they have the groundbreaking effects I've described throughout this video will depend largely on if China is able to develop the technologies to counter them. What is clear is that we're entering a new age of power and technology, and we're entering it very fast. Well, that's all for now. If you liked the video, please share and subscribe. See ya!